generative AI. Thank you. So, whoops. And again, the summary of the agenda, AI use cases for cybersecurity, limitations of AI security risks and warnings, and AI security defenses. And a pretty high level talk. I hope to develop future more specific stakeholders, group specific content from here. But I figured for an introductory presentation, it's good to be high level and somewhat agile. So who am I? I'm a Web3 executive. And so Web3 meaning some startups with blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and also generative AI meets security. And I'm also an IT security consultant. So starting with the use cases for cybersecurity. So vulnerability scanners and anomaly detection are by nature based off of AI in order to detect and detect vulnerabilities, make sense of attack patterns, so sequences of events. If you go through any sort of security incident and security attack, then it's a sequence of steps that progress off the former one in a logical progression. So being able to make sense of them and then detect them and then generate new tooling and new training data for the models that go into these tools. And then being able to make recommendations and potentially security patches in an automated fashion, all using AI. And documentation and policy, we can have ChatGPT's help or another GPT's help, both in terms of writing documentation, and that includes at least drafts of compliance documentation and security documentation, because it recognizes documentation structures by nature. That's one of the features that it enables. And compliance mapping and querying them is one example. So when there are a lot, when you're supposed to do an audit and you want to map the requirements to your infrastructure to make them actionable and practical, then you can query certain matching. So OWASP Open CRA chat is one example. You can map one set of compliance regulatory standards to another, and then map them to your infrastructure and properly address them among your team. Security training. So I as a sysadmin, for example, could ask, could have a conversation with an LLM asking how I can implement two-step verification for Google Workspace specifically. And it will give me the answer. Or to train employees on how to do it themselves if in a leadership position, and trying to get everyone to do their part in really fully securing the organization and education as we know it. We're all supporters of higher education and practical training. That's why we're all here. So being able to train others to build security or data practices into their roles, know enough for doing their research, if they're a researcher, for example, then that is, in a nutshell, our jobs, right? So training them on how to ask the right questions themselves in order to get the right responses, and security is one use case for that. Oops. And security awareness use cases. So you can also, in addition to using AI to generate questions and generate specific documentation and information, you can also generate examples, because learning by example is definitely a solid pedagogy. And being able to generate and view and review, specific examples of some type of threat, for example. So a phishing email being a great, pretty beginner example. You can generate these examples and turn it into some sort of training module. So urgent, which is that keyword is a red flag. And that came up when I generated this one with ChatGPT. Will give unusual activity, so something that triggers some sort of response that may be uninformed and or impulsive because it elicits fear, and that's what some attackers play up. So immediate, again, another red flag followed by a phrase. Anyone who knows some basic NLP will know that the order of the words, the context of the word from some sort of corpus, perhaps. Just the fact that there is a link and that some people either might not know to right click to try or to try to find out more about that link before just going ahead and clicking it. Or if they know, but they're so busy with everything that they kind of mindlessly click it anyway, which totally happens. There's when we're busy, we're only human, we make mistakes. Also, things are models are imperfect, outputs are imperfect, and I mean there are trade-offs when we have these all-in-one solutions that kill several birds with one stone, if you will. And so, for example, an XDR, extended detection and response software tools such as CrowdStrike, fulfilling multiple purposes that are security related. If there is an error in the AI used to build those tools, then it impacts every single system that's using it. And then you get, for example, this Microsoft blue screen of death, as they would, as I believe some people called it. And then every system and organization that relies on it will have to deal with this. And again, at an organizational level, people, leadership personnel will view it as by cost. They can't necessarily so quickly or easily or efficiently, to say the least, go ahead and just change everything, switch to a different vendor. It's really not that simple for various reasons. So just being cognizant that this can still happen, it's pretty terrifying. Yes, and there are kind of high level, almost kind of glorified mystical articles, fun but not trustworthy. So trying to delve into what exactly that means, what exactly trustworthy or not means. Does it have to do with just viewing it from the lens of a subject matter expert? Is it just inaccurate? Or is there some sort of kind of technical security as we know it as IT personnel type of risks? Are there privacy related risks? I suppose that one could generalize it to just safety rather than security, because the term security might kind of accidentally exclude privacy. But when you're relying on it to make informed decision, you want to make sure that it's information, not a hallucination. Also, being mindful of what you ask to an LLM. So for example, um, if you want to ask about the meaning of life, um, you can definitely just think about what would happen if you asked that to a human. What is the meaning of life? I'm sure that they would have some sort of philosophical response, depending who they are, but it wouldn't necessarily be meaningful because it's a very vague general question that is super up for interpretation. So when it's up for interpretation by a human, then it's not necessarily meaningful or actionable for an LLM that draws upon all these sources and gives you some sort of response. So make the question specific, make the questions meaningful, continue to refine your question. Keep in mind that a session in one of these tools allows you to keep asking questions, keep responding, keep the discussion open, which is an important feature. Just know how to use it. I think from my experience, at the risk of overgeneralization, the most important thing that you can get from one of these chats is more questions to ask, inspiration for more questions to ask to refine things. So again, defenses, um, again, keeping it very high level, um, um, and not to, delve into, for example, OAuth, some sort of OAuth standard, for example, for LLM security and people developing LLMs. That would be kind of more specific. Just asking, was my prompt specific enough? Um, is this going to get me the type of output that I'll really be able to use? And that would be reliable. Am I being responsible in my use? What kind of data might be involved? What what ethical practices might I or might I not be complying with? Um, does the output make sense based on subject matter expertise? Just some human expert being able to review and see what might not make sense and what might need further research. Do I need others' expertise? Um, Nobody knows everything. That's one of the beauty of collaboration and groups like this, right? So what and establishing roles and responsibilities and policies accordingly. So, um, is it some sort of compliance checklist that you're trying to map this to? Or is it some sort of kind of more indirect ad hoc training activity that you want to put together based on recurring questions from people within your organization that shows that things are not necessarily clearly communicated and you want to adapt to that and you want to provide the training required based on everyone's misunderstanding. So, to whom should certain activities or education be rolled out and how and what form? Um, Gathering feedback from the personnel themselves, being aware of the context within your organization in addition to the context of the outputs themselves. And yeah, so again, a lot of it is at the end of the day, just more questions to ask, um, more ways to refine and how to make it actionable by humans within your organization. So that's it for the presentation, and I would love to, get a sense of how you might have used um, LLMs for example, employee training or um, or other ways within your departments and organizations. Um, so what are some questions that you've asked? Maybe if any of you are willing to share a story about how you've used and you've used one of these tools and maybe some sort of problem that arose and how you addressed it. For example, like in addressing it, how would you make the prompt more specific? Um, or how would you ask someone else to? Yes, Laura.
I was trying to click on the option to raise my hand and I could not find it, but
Oh.
I was going to say one example we're experimenting with right now is I'm making videos on data management, and we were experimenting with this tool called Narrakeet, where you can feed it a script and then it converts it to an audio, and it has lots of different choices of audio. And I think that could make things a lot more efficient. I admit I like the idea of having my own audio on the training, but I think I could give it up because it could make just editing and making changes so much more efficient. And so far, when I tried it, the voice sounded a little tinny and it was a little bit fast. But another person said, well, if you try a different audio type, it sounds more natural. So that's my story.
That's good to know. Yeah, and again, just learning from others. That's a great example. Also, I don't think I had any audio related examples in my deck, so I'm really glad that you shared that. Anyone else? Like who here has learned a lot from an LLM? Perhaps in a way that you haven't been able to learn from a human just because of limited scope um, of knowledge or limited context. Anyone? I mean, I learned more bioinformatics in an hour than I thought I could learn in an hour being a non-bioinformatics person by having, expert guided training on how to use an LLM for that. And I was absolutely surprised in a lovely way that I could go and learn so much that quickly because I was directed to meaningful resources. And then, I was able to gain from them gain from those resources all that I could in if there was a half an hour long video, then in a half an hour. And I skipped the where do I look because I was shown. I mean that's my kind of wow moment that I would like to share. And I mean, kind of if you reverse engineer that kind of scenario, if you will, um, I mean, so a researcher who actually has that kind of knowledge, how might they be able to transfer their knowledge back to you? Um, how might they be able to even more quickly utilize these LLMs to gain more information, more actionable insights, or just, yeah, I mean, to share their knowledge. Or, I mean, there are also ways to use these tools to do the fact checking.
I think that should be an experience that I think what I've realized is not necessarily that I'm always like really wow. I mean, things get generated really fast. I appreciate that. But you mentioned earlier about the the prompt and how specific you need to be, and it really puts me in a different mindset of how I have to talk to a machine. Because I'm always trying to, or when I do run something through the like ChatGPT or something, it seems to always need another iteration. So it makes me realize that I need to keep training myself, and actually there's a lot of time investment into creating a really good, specific, with all the right details prompt. And so sometimes I feel like, am I getting the right thing out of this? And how do I do that to improve it? And yeah, I just find that a real challenge. When I get there, it'll probably be really great, but right now it's still a challenge for me.
That's, yeah, I mean, that definitely sounds familiar. It's certainly a process and a skill to build. It's something, I mean, in that regard, it can really test one's communication skills. I know I've used it that way, but I mean, just the fact that even, some sort of communications expert would be able to use it for that, because it's different talking to machine. It's different talking, um, um, kind of building a chat from the ground up, starting from that initial prompt. Uh, and it's just also kind of interesting seeing how much different is a specific question and a specific prompt. How much different is the output than if you were to just Google it, and why? And again, knowing a little bit about search and how it works, but it's still kind of interesting. I still get surprises. Um, so, I mean, it's interesting to learn how that is. I've definitely used that versus, for example, Google Dorking, and kind of compared and contrast doing reputation management, um, getting interesting results. I had I went into that with an illogical assumption that I would get more meaningful results by asking a full sentence question to a prompt than I would by just doing a Google search. And I actually wasn't necessarily right. It was just different. I don't even know if it was necessarily comparable. But again, because of the specificity of the question, also, I mean, I imagine there's always some aspect that is also under the hood of the models themselves. Um, so, I mean, it was just a really interesting experiment. Um, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
just,
and so, oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
oh, no, go ahead, sorry.
The question for you and maybe for the rest of the call too. So Amy's comment about continuing to iterate through questions that you ask of these models put me in mind of a lot of conversations we're having on campus around students putting data that they might not like to share, or that data that probably shouldn't go into a training set. And so trying to develop guardrails around the use of these tools on campus. And I just wonder if you had any recommendations for setting those guardrails, and or if anyone else on the call is working on these kinds of guidance, that kind of guidance on their campuses.
That I would love to start an official project if that's all right. I mean, how might be able to address this? Deb and Amy, you'll know better than I do. Because I would love to create such a guide. Um, yeah, I mean, getting specific, getting the feedback from everyone in this group, because a lot of the responsibilities is on the students ultimately, because we're not controlling what they do into search, for example, or how they would or would not interact. So how can we best help? Yes, Ken?
Yeah, so we've been looking at open models and then hosting them on-prem so that whatever information you put into it stays with us. And we've also started seeing the cloud vendors say each time you want to use an LLM, you're actually hosting a version in your own account. It is not part of their version that they're, you know, say scraping the internet and generating information for. So that way you're confident that your data stays within your account and is not being used by another cloud vendor in that respect. So we've got a group that's already put up several open models on-prem for people to use. And at the moment, they're at least supporting the use of those models for free. I don't know if that's going to, you know, be their long-term goal, because again, the compute power behind these models is fairly extensive. So, you know where your model is, and know, you know, who's actually running it, and is that model, you know, in your domain or is it in someone else's domain before you start putting information into it.
Good guidance. And is this mostly for class use or some kind of more?
It's for anything. So they basically, they opened it up to, you can use an open model, you can connect it to your LMS. In our case, we use Canvas. And so an instructor can say, okay, here's my course, here are all of my course materials, feed all of that into the LLM, point the students toward that particular LLM link now, so that they can go and review material and you know, catch up depending on what's going on in the course. And we now know that all of that material is not being leaked outside of the university's boundaries because it's being hosted on-prem with an open source LLM that's also being hosted on-prem. But a researcher could use it, a student could use it to, you know, unfortunately, you know, write their own papers and things. So, you know, we've just kind of left it up to the individual as to how they want to approach this. But we now know that whatever you put in it, it's still ours.
That's good. Yeah, that warning is so necessary. They just don't know. So yeah, I mean that's really great. I'm gonna definitely borrow from that inspiration. Jim?
So I ran into the guy that's the head of the writing programs at Penn State. So that this is and there's a course that they do that's called English 15, which every single first year student has to take. So they have like tens of thousands of students that take that every year. And this year, every single section is going to have the impact of AI on writing and composition. And so it's mostly a intro to composition type class. And the guy is really forward thinking. And he said, you know, by the time these guys get into the workforce, they're going to have to deal with this anyway. So we might as well treat it, you know, teach them how to use it ethically, see what it can do in terms of, you know, I'll come up with a rough draft and have ChatGPT edit it for me, or I'll have ChatGPT come up with a raw draft and I'll edit it and go and see how it improves. So there's going to be specific assignments like that where they say, okay, right, you know, gather all you know about this subject that you don't know about from an AI, and then, you know, come up with you know, 5-page paper about this subject that you don't know, previously you didn't know anything about. So instead of sort of saying, well, you can't use it, you know, you can't use ChatGPT in my classroom because that's cheating, they're going to embrace it and anticipate, you know, what the future workplace might look like. Because most of the people that take this course are not English majors. so that they'll use writing to, communicate in their future jobs. So I thought that was like stunning. I mean, he has something like 400 and some sections of this course that are all going to be teaching, some form of AI this semester. And then he's going to put it into the next level of the course is sort of a discipline specific writing course. So there's one for business majors and science majors, science and engineers, and sociology type people. So, and that's next, he told me. But we have a similar agreement where the AI is not going to be using the student input to enhance their or augment their model. So we've also got that agreement, and it plugs into Canvas, which is the learning system.
I really like that because, God, I remember my expository writing class at the very beginning of undergrad, and I still could have used that to make it tangible because I don't know when I've used it. And even further on, I was a business major, so even further along, I think actually that was my senior year where I took business writing specifically. That could have been so valuable, so much more practical than starting from the ground up and going through significantly fewer examples and significantly less content. I could have really that could have really made things a lot more practical. So I really like that. I really like that. Again, I'm gonna as well.
Yeah, I can put you in touch with them because it's just a fascinating story. And it's sort
Sure.
of all developed over the course of last semester. He piloted it with a couple sections, including some that he taught. And then they just said he's going to go whole hog this semester for every single section of this, intro to writing course. And it's going to create maybe a conflict with the College of Education has decided that you're not going to use AI in any of your classes because that's how students cheat. So I think there's going to be there's going to be a coming to terms with that this semester, I think, across Penn State.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, I mean, I think, especially non-technical professors. My uncle, for example, who teaches religious studies at Syracuse University. So he's kind of immediately said they're cheating and gone through that lens. But I was trying to convince him that he could just spin that around rather than getting upset with their students and giving them Fs. Because I know he doesn't want to do that. He's not the type of person who would want to do that, but he didn't see an option. So I was trying to say, hey, just kind of spin it around, see what happens, see what happens. I don't know. I know nothing about theology or what might be covered in those types of courses, but I imagine there's something that he just hasn't thought of. Because it's such a, I mean, obviously plagiarism is not good, but if you're trying to, help them be critical thinkers in the real world, how can you spin this? Let's, view it from that angle. I really like that. And I'm
Yeah.
curious about the sociology and social sciences specifically that you mentioned. I'm trying to think back to sociology classes that I've taken, some social sciencey curriculum that I might want to spin up on my own. Hmm.
Yeah, they have different sections of the next level course, and they're sort of geared around discipline specific type writing. So that's as much as I know. I was not an undergraduate at Penn State, so though I fathered two of them.
Very
So,
nice.
but I can see, with your uncle, I mean, I can see, go through, tell me every Bible verse that deals with money, or every Bible verse that deals with taxation. Okay. So you could talk to an expert on the Bible and, you could give it a specific translation, or you could ask ChatGPT to do that for you in like 2 minutes. So I could see a real benefit for using it in a class like religious studies.
Yeah. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I see a lot of parallels in terms of how I've learned through how I've learned to use LLMs to go through, am I doing something illegal in entrepreneurial endeavors? I think without having to necessarily try to contact a lawyer and their limited capacity to volunteer until we respond. Yeah, it's good. I'm gonna get back to my uncle, and I'll let you know what happens if, if you're in.
Yeah, Jim, that disciplinary disjunct that you talked about also where, College of Ed may struggle with this more. I think making sure that these policies are aligned at the campus level is going to be a really tough lift.
Well, he told me he's on the committee for doing exactly that, is coming up with some kind of guidance, across campuses for use of AI.
So cross campuses, is that something open that I might be able to explore?
Say that again.
Is that like some sort of open working
Oh,
group?
no, we have multiple campuses. So,
So
so
cross
yeah,
campuses among. Okay.
yeah. So we have like 24 sort of undergraduate campuses across the
Makes sense.
Commonwealth in a medical school or two, or in a law school or two. So,
Makes sense being Penn State. Anyone else? Any stories of any sort? I know we're supposed to end in around 8 minutes, right? So I'll also check the schedule to make sure there's not something I'm missing that I was supposed to cover. Um, Still practicing. Yeah, I really like uh and am inspired by a lot of what was said. Um, Yeah, I think just a lot of it is education, seeing what comes next. I'm also curious about what security specific solutions others might have implemented in a campus setting. Um, yeah, from
It looks like there's a ton of good resources in the chat. So thanks to everybody for dropping policies in there too. And we will, of course, be sure to share out the chat transcript and the call notes along with the recording.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So as far as LMS are most of you using Canvas? Or is there some variety? Thank you. Okay, the risk management makes sense. Learn iteratively. I really like that. Oh, building diversity into it. It's an excellent point. Absolutely. Thinking critically. I think that'll always be part of education, that will not, you can never replace that. Wow. This is good.
Well, Zoe, I don't know if you had anything else, or if not, maybe we can end a little bit early.
That sounds good to me. I can give you guys some of your time back. Again, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. I have never closed out a call track before, so I'm going to say thank you all for attending, and we will circulate a recording of the call along with the notes in the chat doc. And until then, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
For steering committee members, we could probably just pop over to the other Zoom right now.
Deb, that sounds good. I'm trying to get the chat. If I just do save chat, it should chat saved. Show in Finder. Got
Um,
it. Perfect.
Yeah, it's also included in the cloud recording.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
All right. Thanks. See you in a second.